Hi, everyone. Welcome back to DGS Presents. Today, I went back into the archives and I uploaded an interview that we did, or Chad did, with Stephen D. Sullivan, who was and is a game designer, artistic director, author, who worked for TSR, Pacesetter, and other companies, and also produced a lot of his own original content. Lots of interesting things to say about the working for TSR and Pacesetter back in the 80s and 90s and his current projects. But I'll let Chad do all the formal introductions and give you a little more background. This is audio only, but I think you will enjoy it. Thanks for coming.
And welcome back to the Dead Game Society podcast. I hope you all had a great Halloween. And on this post-Halloween day, I have the good fortune of talking with Stephen D. Sullivan, author, artist, editor, and publisher. And aside from his work with TSR, Stephen's also played a pretty major role in bringing us the original Pacesetter game, Chill. So how are you today, Steve?
I'm pretty good. It seems to be one of those nothing quite connects right days, but but hopefully that's all behind us now. You and I are connected, and everything will go swimmingly from here on to the end of the day.
Swimmingly, and we are connected. So how was your Halloween? Did you hand out any rocks?
No, I did not get any rocks. I had a really nice band of trick-or-treaters. Our kids are all in college or out now, so we don't go out anymore. We just have to wait until the kids come to us. I had my Barnabas Collins outfit on.
Nice.
Though not the fangs, because you don't want to scare the little kids.
Yeah, they may not. They probably didn't know Dark Shadows, did they?
Right, yeah, and I handed out a lot of candy and comic books, because we hand out comics as well as candy.
Ah, I see. Well, I guess you could have told them you were the third Doctor Who. They probably wouldn't have known that person either.
The funny thing was, I had a wig on, but I had it on wrong because the kids started showing up before they were supposed to. And my wife came home and she laughed at it, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, "Oh my God, I look like John Pertwee."
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, one of the first guys we had that came with a younger sister was dressed as Matt Smith.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I was like, at first I was just like, okay, that's just an older teenager accompanying this young kid. And then I noticed the red bow tie, and I was like, oh my God, you're Matt
Did he have
Smith.
A fez on?
And he pulled out his little sonic screwdriver.
Oh, nice. Nice. Was he wearing a fez?
No, he was not wearing the fez.
Fezzes are cool.
Fezzes are cool.
In fact, you know what? Before we get into it, I just thought this bit of trivia. I know you're a huge Doctor Who fan. And did you know that the fez and mop that Matt Smith carries, that was not the first Doctor Who to wear a fez and carry a mop?
I did not know that consciously, but I'm sure you're going to tell me who was.
Well, yes, I am actually. It was actually done as an inside joke based on Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor. If you watch the episode, The Silver Nemesis, with the Seventh Doctor, Sylvester McCoy, you will see that at one point he puts a fez on and he picks up a mop.
Cool. McCoy is the doctor that I've probably seen the least, because by the time he rolled around, our local Doctor Who coverage was very spotty. And I'm not even sure that I've seen all of the McCoy episodes. I think I've seen most of them, but I wouldn't swear. And most of the rest of the set, Channel 11 in Chicago, played them like a movie every week. They'd put all the episodes together and then run them on Sunday night. So every week you would get like a whole episode arc of Doctor Who. And they got through the whole arc a couple of times. And then they would add the new ones in. But by the time they got through the arc and got up to McCoy's new ones, the audience had fallen off, and they were starting to move it around in different time slots. And, it's too bad, but hopefully...
what do you think of the newest Doctor we have?
Capaldi, I really like him a lot. I think he's pretty terrific, and there have been some good shows. It's nice to see someone more my age in the role.
Yeah, I think it's neat that they kind of went with a slightly older Doctor, and I like the fact that he reminds me a lot of the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker.
Yes, Yeah, and I like the new personality where he's a little bit abrasive and a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
kind of superior, and it's interesting to see them playing up different aspects of who the Doctor is, rather than as your cool best friend, which, the last couple of Doctors were kind of your cool best friend who knows everything. And this
Right, and loves all
right,
humans.
and this one doesn't, and that's
Yeah, this one, I like there's one scene where a kid comes in and he's working on the TARDIS and he says, "Hey, didn't you see the sign? It says no entry." And she says, "No, it doesn't. It says go away, humans." And the older Doctors were like that. They were a little more abrasive. So I really like that. I thought that's
right.
cool.
It's funny. We all think of the first Doctor as being really old, but I was doing a little math when they were doing this anniversary, and it was like, oh my God, he was my age. I think we age a little better now that we're not all smoking and drinking constantly. But at the same time,
most
it's
of
like
us.
Peter Capaldi and William Hartnell, they're almost exactly the same age.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, they are. Well, I tell you what, I could talk about Doctor Who all
Yeah, I
day,
could too.
but I know the listeners really want to hear you talk about the things that you've been doing. So before we get really into it, why don't you just take a moment and tell us, what kind of stuff are you working on right now, Steve?
Right now, I just delivered and had printed the paperback edition of Daikaiju Attack, which was my giant monster serialized story that I ran online for about a year. So that's just come out. I've worked on a Steam and Rust supplement for Lester Smith's D6 times D6 game. Just turned that in. I put up a flash fiction story from the Frost Harrow universe, which is my horror universe that I keep promising to put the books out in, and somehow things always get pushed back. But there's a new flash fiction up on that for Halloween this year, which I've done flash fiction for that universe in the last couple of years, so carrying on the tradition there. And I am in the midst of finalizing the print edition of Tournament of Death 3, which was a Kickstarter I ran earlier this year, and it runs during the Olympics, and basically during the 16 days of the Olympics I write a whole book with live online with input from backers.
Oh, wow. So is there any place the listeners can go to get some of this work?
You can go and you can find most of my stuff that's printed on Amazon. Obviously, you can go to sdsullivan.com or Stephen D. Sullivan, but you have to remember Stephen is spelled with a PH. StephenDSullivan.com. That's my main website. Both of those links will take you to the main website, which tends to be fairly up to date with what's going on in my life.
Oh, okay. Are you going to be doing the NaNoWriMo? That just started today.
Yeah, I know. I always say I do that I do it in my day-to-day life. I don't need to do it one specific month a year. I've already written 2 or 3 books this year. So
wow.
So it's not like I need to spur myself on to do another one. And as soon as I get Tournament of Death wrapped up, I will be starting a new project or new projects, depending upon what my schedule looks like at that point.
Well, since we did just do Halloween last night, what better game to talk about than Pacesetter's Original Chill? Tell us a little bit about your involvement in that project.
Well, I was one of the original Pacesetter crew. I was hired on as the art director, and because of the rollout way that Pacesetter was organized, we all didn't start working at the same time, because it's like the designers need a little time before you get the art and the layout and all that kind of stuff. So I actually started working a little later than Mark Akers did, for instance. But basically, I was in on the Pacesetter conspiracy to leave TSR from the very beginning.
Well, okay, well, you bring that up. So, explain that a little bit.
The TSR was a wonderful place to work, and it was a terrible place to work. It was wonderful in that there were an amazing number of really interesting, creative people there that had been hired in. I started at TSR in 1980 and left in 1984. And in that time, there were just all sorts of wonderful creative people working at TSR, but the management system was just awful. Yeah.
Really?
Once you got above the creative department, it was just, there was a lot of infighting, and there was an article recently about how Gary Gygax lost control of D&D. And if you read that, you can kind of find out the backstory, because basically there was a struggle at the top of the company between the Blooms and Gary for who would control the company and what direction they were going. And the Blooms were, like buying things like needlework companies, and Gary was trying to keep his hand in the games and make sure that his name was on the products and that kind of stuff. All of that tended to trickle down and really make working in the creative divisions difficult at times. So there was a lot of kind of back and forth there. And by 1984, we'd all moved out of the nice downtown building with the windows into the Sheridan Springs building that had no windows, which was particularly frustrating because I was in the art department at that time. And the last thing you want to do is lock lots of artists up in a little box. And the levels of management above us included some people that actually seemed hostile to the creative process. So there was constantly kind of you need to do stuff our way, and their way wouldn't work, and then we'd have to fix the problems and that kind of stuff. And the end result was you had a lot of middle managers, people above. Jim Rosloff was the art director, and I don't remember who was in charge of the game designers and that kind of stuff. But if you got like one level beyond the people that were actually doing the work, it was all company politics.
Basically, was there then yourself and there are other people in the creative department for TSR then who went on to work with Pacesetter?
Yeah, there was a bunch of us. We realized at some point one of our middle managers, who ended up not working out so well at Pacesetter, had a thought that maybe he should collect kind of the best creative people he could, start his own company. He was a really good manager at TSR because he was very hands-off. As it turned out, that wasn't really great at Pacesetter because he ended up kind of doing nothing all day. But I won't name him right now because it's like the good and the bad, both in that package. But the good thing was that he managed to get a lot of people like Mark Akers and Michael Williams and Carl Smith and Andrea Hayday and Troy Denning and everybody forgive me if I haven't mentioned you here, but they found a nice core group of people and started having these secret meetings in which he would say, okay, we're looking at getting this amount of money and we could bring these people on. And so while we were working at TSR, and thank God, statute of limitations long expired, a lot of us were getting together secretly and planning to leave the company and start Pacesetter.
Yeah, and they didn't have Kickstarters back then, so you were mentioning trying to get the funds together to put it. I mean, how did that work?
It basically worked on a venture capital basis, but as it turns out, the guy that was running the accounting was a crook, and that's actually Pacesetter eventually folded because it was undercapitalized from the beginning. And my understanding of it is, and other people may have other understanding, is basically the guy that was in charge of doing the accounting, we had raised X number of dollars, and that was supposed to get us started. And then at some point, we were supposed to start paying investors some kind of a dividend. And what ended up happening was we got that sum of money. We were paying our salaries and our production costs, which in the days before you had scanners on your desktop and computers was considerable. I think we had a typesetting machine. It was worth somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. So the upfronts were really big. And just to do a cover for a book was $2,000 or $3,000 just to do the separations for it. Something I could do on my desktop right now.
Right, and you guys put out a boxed edition for Chill.
Yeah, and Chill, we put out 4 boxed edition role-playing. In the 2 years we existed, we put out 4 boxed edition role-playing games, 3 or maybe more than that, actual board games, and dozens of modules. I mean, literally dozens. There's probably at least 36 modules over that 24-month period, plus the games. So there was a lot of cost just to put that stuff together. And what happened was, after a certain period, very early on, much sooner than it should have been, they'd promised the investors that they would start getting return on their money. Well, as I understand it, what was really happening was that the accountant was taking money from our seed money and paying it back to the people that had put the money in the first place. So basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that ended up creating a point where we were like, where's the money to do this next project? And the guy was like, the money is gone. I'm like, where is it gone? Well, it went to pay back people that we probably shouldn't have been paying back at that point. So basically the capital from Pacesetter was being eaten by both ends. And it came a point in 1986 where there was just no money, literally no money. And we'd all been on half salary at that point too, so none of us had any savings. And the company went out of business and all its assets were sold various places. Chill went to Mayfair Games, and most of the rest of the stuff went to Don Bingle, who was our biggest fan. So it was kind of nice that he was able to obtain that stuff, but very sad that the...
Oh, yeah. And you guys did some really neat games. I mean, there was Time Master. And what were some of the other products?
We did Time Master, and we did Star Ace. We did Wabbit Wampage, the board game, and Wabbit's Revenge. We did Blackmorn Manor. We did Sandman, which is now owned by someone I won't talk to. We won't get into that. And like I said, many, many game modules related to all those products. Chill was the first. When we started the company, looking for niches that we could fill that weren't really being filled other places. And even though Call of Cthulhu was out, Call of Cthulhu is a really cool game, but it's very Lovecraft centered. Now, I'm a huge Lovecraft fan, so that's wonderful. But we thought that there would be a market for a more traditional Gothic horror kind of role-playing game, something that could encompass anything from 1920s horror, Robert E. Howard and that kind of, early horror writers during the 20th century, through Hammer films, and then up into the present with the Night Stalker and the Night Strangler and those kind of things.
Yeah, it had a lot more, instead of an H.P. Lovecraft feel, it had more of a Mary Shelley
Yeah,
feel.
we thought of it more as kind of Universal Monsters or Hammer horror was what we were aiming for, but with potentially a modern twist, because you could play Chill in any time period. The Lovecraft game seems to work kind of best back in the 1920s, but Chill could run modern games just as easily as it could 1920s games, and you could even run it back further into the 17th or 18th century if you were so inclined. So we were looking to cast a much broader net and basically scoop up all the people that didn't want to play Lovecraft for whatever reason.
Right. If you wanted to do a more traditional Gothic horror style game and not so much the otherworldly alien, the outer
the
gods,
cosmic horror.
This was the game. Yeah, the cosmic horror.
As I said, I love Lovecraft. He's one of my favorite writers. And
oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Call of Cthulhu, but there's a time and a place, for both games. And sometimes you just wanna deal with more traditional monsters like vampires and mummies.
Right. We actually did.
Sometimes you just want to hear a good
We actually
ghost story.
did a Dracula series of modules and stuff for Chill. So that was kind of right in our wheelhouse. And again, as you say, ghosts, the Read Me First adventure that you could start playing, that was one of the innovations we were working on at Pacesetter, was a booklet you could pick up and start playing the game pretty much right out of the box within just a couple of minutes. And the first adventure included in that was a ghost story. So, and then we had, all sorts of other mythologies and monsters that we'd brought in from all over the world. We did a supplemental book called Things that I ended up doing the cover for, and later we did a game supplement called Creature Feature, in which the players played the monsters rather than people. So that was kind of dark and humorous and a lot of fun. We were enjoying that. Basically, our goal was to own all horror that wasn't Cthulhu.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job, because there wasn't a lot of other games out there in the horror genre.
No, there weren't. And that's one of the reasons we chose that. And also because all of us were really into it. I mean, I've been a monster kid ever since I can remember. I mean, monster kid is a new term. I've been a monster kid since I was 5, basically.
Oh yeah, yeah. I used to stay up watching Friday Fright Night.
Absolutely. And Chill was designed to do that. Now, when Pacesetter ended and it went to Mayfair, the tone of it seemed to shift from Poe and Hammer to kind of Michael Myers and Friday the 13th and Halloween. And I was never really comfortable with that. Not a huge fan of the second edition. And now they're doing a third edition, and I've supported them a little bit. And, it's chill, so I have a fellow feeling for it. And I think they're kind of going somewhere in between the two editions. Apparently they don't have the license to use the first edition material, which seems crazy to me, but that's what they say. So what you gonna do?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. A lot of the time when I'm interviewing people, I'm really, I'm getting the story on how it goes in the creative process from, doing the writing is more. I don't get a chance to talk really with the art side of it as much. How do you see? And you've done both. You've sat on both sides of the table. Where do you prefer to sit, and where do you see some of the differences between, say, the editing, the writing, and the art?
I was trained as an artist, but on the other hand, I've always been a storyteller too. So right now I'm doing almost exclusively writing. But on the other hand, I keep doing covers as well. So there is still that dichotomy. When I started at TSR, I was an editor in 1980, and I worked on what they now call Moldve Cook, Basic and Expert, with Harold Johnson and John Pickens and Frank Metzner and a lot of the other people of what we would now call the editorial team, but back then was called production. And that was really interesting because that was a job for organizing and fixing things.
Right. Yeah. It's
and I still like organizing and fixing things. There's a great joy in that. And, according to the official line, Dave Cook and Tom Moldve were the editors of those two books, but they really weren't. They were just the designers of those two books. And then there was a development process and the editorial process in which basically we reorganized a lot of what they did and wrote missing pieces for entries they had and that kind of stuff, and tried to make it all come out as one seamless whole, which seems to have pretty much worked. So that's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that. The reason I stopped doing that was because there came a point in TSR during these management struggles where in 1981, if I remember rightly, they had hired Steve Winter, who was a great game designer and a great guy and a great writer. He was terrific, one of the best employees they ever hired, and a really good friend. But Steve Winter was the first person they had hired that actually had a related degree. The rest of us were all sort of, geeks from
trying to fit the mold.
Here and there.
You guys just fans, yeah.
Steve could do the stuff, but he also had a journalism degree, and I think that may have spurred them on to think, well, this guy's great. He's got a journalism degree. We should make sure that everyone we hire has a related degree. Make sure that everyone we employ currently has a related degree in editing or writing or something like that. And here I am sitting in the editorial department, and I've left school. I left college to join their staff and work there. And they're saying they're going to fire people that don't have related degrees in the editorial. So I said, since I had art experience, I said, I'll go down to the art department. And they were like, okay, that's fine. Now, as it turned out, it was a hollow threat, and they didn't actually fire anybody. And in fact, the people that they hired who had quote unquote related degrees, there was one guy that came from Omni, and there was another gal that came from somewhere in the book trade. Those people were terrible. Because what made Steve Winter so good was that Steve was a gamer like all the other people they had up there. In any case, I ended up fleeing down to the art department, and then because my art was not quite as good as some of the other people, ended up doing a lot of maps, Jim Rosloff gave me a kind of a pep talk. Do the best you could do at maps. So I ended up doing a lot of maps. In fact, there was like a point where Dave LaForce wasn't there, where I was literally working on every product TSR put out for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, because I did all the maps. And you know,
yeah. I know you did a lot of stuff with Dragonlance. You helped out with the free
right,
photo.
yeah, and all of us, the original crew that were there, we all kind of had a little bit of Renaissance man stuff going with us. So not everybody was both a writer and an artist, editor kind of person, but we had a lot of people that could do more than one job and were very into it from the gaming aspect. So that was cool.
Sure. Did you ever see any kind of personality differences between, say, the artists and well, here's something like, I want to use the correct terminology when I'm talking about the different roles. Maybe you could really quickly just run down, what does the editor do? What does the artist do? What is, who does what?
The editor is generally in charge of making sure the product gets out the door and that it looks good. In the old days, we didn't have separate layout and typesetting services within the company. So the editor would basically take the raw manuscript and then herd it all the way from there to print, making editorial changes and stuff. Now, there was a step in TSR early on that was called Devo, where they would do the playtesting and then they would make correct changes that in order to correct things they found that were flaws and that kind of stuff. But basically, the editor's job was to take the manuscript and see it all the way through to print, which meant in the old days going down to the printers and watching with typesetting and layout and that kind of stuff, and sometimes even doing some of that stuff. The editor is, or at least was at that time, also the person that would order the art. And the art was kind of ordered based on what kind of spaces you had left in the manuscript when it was typeset and laid out. So, for instance, I, as the editor on a project, would find these spaces, and then I'd talk to Jim Rosloff and say, here are the spaces. This is the kind of stuff we think we need in here. Would you get Jeff D. or Bill Willingham or Errol Otis or whoever was on staff at the time, or all of them, to do pieces that'll fit this thing? And depending upon how tight your deadline was, you might get one artist who would do all the work, or you might get 2 or 3 to fill in all the slots. And at some point, the art department would handle the maps too. Maps usually came as roughs from the designers or the developers, and then would go down to the art department, and the map artist would work with the editor and with the designers to do a map that looked a lot better than the designer had turned in, and would help to make the game play properly.
I see. Now, you mentioned the designers. Obviously, designers, I would think, is the person who he came up with the brainchild of the game itself, writes the initial drafts, which then go to the editor, and the editor then polishes them, changes them?
Usually. With a game company, there's a lot of playtesting involved and stuff, so it's not quite as straight a line as it might seem. But basically, the designer is the writer. It's the person that originates the manuscript. Now, you may have had some kind of a conference before in which you would say, we are going to do 4 modules about dwarven kingdoms, and group come up with an idea and then split it off into 3 or 4 sections and assign a designer to each one. In fact, Dragonlance kind of worked that way, in that it was Tracy's idea. Tracy had this idea for doing a series of modules about dragons, and then we had a lot of meetings talking about what kind of stuff it would do. A lot of the stuff came right out of Tracy's mind, but a lot of stuff other people threw in or helped develop. I remember Harold Johnson was very fond of the Kender and helped develop that race for Dragonlance. And so when you have a bullpen, the way we did at TSR or the way we did at Pacesetter, there's a lot of cross-contamination. So I can point to stuff that I wrote in the Moldvay Cook Basic and Expert, and everyone has little pieces that they contributed to the whole. I remember stuff that I did for the Dracula series at Pacesetter, and in theory it's a very clear path.
So from cradle to grave, while it may sound like things are compartmentalized, in reality the lines are very...
Especially when you're working with people you like, you get a lot of interchange of ideas. And that's one of the wonderful things about actually being in an office and working with people that way, is you get a lot of cross-contamination.
Yeah, I think that would lend itself to the creativity of the game because, you're not limiting yourself just to what these guys come up with. You're allowing a free flow of ideas back and forth. And would you say that, do you think TSR, as it later on, as it got more corporate, I guess you would say, did they make it more compartmentalized in the later 80s?
It did get a little more that way. Basically, the big break was between the creative divisions and management. And that was and that was where most of the problems arose. Because in theory, you hire people to do a job and then you let them do the job. And if they're doing the job, you leave them alone. Somehow it never quite worked out that way at TSR. We had creative people, and then we had a typesetter, and then we had the manager guy. And the manager guy would basically, he didn't actually have approval of what the creative people were doing. So we would all do our jobs, and then it would come out. And that was one of the ways that Pacesetter was able to put out so much stuff so quickly, was we didn't have other layers above us trying to stop whatever we were doing or trying to micromanage us in any way. It was all of us just working our asses off, get it done.
Exactly. Yeah, and without the management micromanaging, you guys could get things done.
Yeah, we started Pacesetter in the spring of 1984, and we had Chill debuted at Gen Con that year. So 6 months later, maybe? So a very intensive process. And often games will take a year or more to get out the door.
What was the initial reception to
People
Chill?
really liked Chill a lot. It seemed we'd picked our niche well. Because, as we said, there wasn't really anything in that niche. There was Cthulhu, and if you wanted to play Cthulhu, Cthulhu was the best thing to play. And everybody knew that. But if you wanted to play Dracula, or you wanted to play the Wolfman, or you wanted to play The Shining, Chill was a good choice for all that other stuff. Because it wasn't so wrapped up in whether you're going to go insane or not, for one thing. Yeah, I love Cthulhu. We used to play Cthulhu at TSR all the time. But one of the limitations...
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Lawrence Schick actually ran a right when it first came out, a Call of Cthulhu game that was based in Lake Geneva area while we were there. And there was a Halloween that Steve Winter and I went out and we actually did a Cthulhu tour of Lake Geneva in which we hit all of the places that had been in Lawrence's game. Skulking around around the old mansions by the lakefront on a dark Halloween night and discovering that the mansion we'd burned to the ground in the game was actually being completely rebuilt after who knows what. That was...
Well, did you guys have an ongoing Chill game going?
Well, after Pacesetter, we had a lot of playtests, but we didn't...
Oh, yeah, I guess at Pacesetter, I would mean, did you guys
because obviously it wasn't there when I was at TSR. So I don't know what the TSR folks may have done with Chill. But in Pacesetter, it wasn't a campaign as such. It was more of a series of ongoing playtests for the work, just to make sure it was working. Because honestly, I don't remember how many Chill products came out, though I did the maps for every single one of them. But there were a lot.
Well, there was quite a bit that came out. Yeah, there was a lot. I remember the one with the cover. It looked like Elvira.
That actually is Elvira. We licensed Elvira and did Evenings of Terror with Elvira, which was a series of shorter Chill games and was very popular. One of the things, Chill became popular very quickly. And I think one of the reasons was in terms of our player characters, we'd been very careful to be very inclusive. So half of all our player characters were always women. And a good percentage of our player characters were minorities of some type, whether they were Hispanic or Black or Asian or whatever. There was always a good ethnic mix and an equality between the sexes in terms of the characters. And that seemed to open up the doors for people to play Chill that might not have been willing to play, your standard medieval women are in the kitchen kind of fantasy. So some of the first players that we had that were very devoted were people like Ann Brown, who later went on to work at TSR, who was a female gamer. And we had a lot of female gamers, and the ratio was much higher, male to female in Chill, much more equal. than I've ever seen, even to this day, in D&D. And I say that as someone I'm married to a D&D girl. So yeah,
you're a lucky man.
Very lucky.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point too, because it seems like there are games out there, I think, that have a greater draw for gamer girls, as we call them, and tend to be more story based as opposed to just going and killing whatever is in front of you. And I think Chill is a very good example of a game that has a great storyline going on during the game.
Right. That was one of the things we shot for. I mean, we were looking to make it feel like you were playing inside a gothic horror story, whether it's Dracula or a ghostly version of Wuthering Heights, or even, as I said, a modern version with the kind of a Night Stalker thing, or certainly the Night Stalker TV show was a big influence. So.
Yeah, I actually ran Chill. That's when I first met you, actually, at GaryCon. That would have been like, what was that, a year ago, I think? Yeah, that was the last GaryCon. And I ran my Chill, had the players assuming the roles of the characters from Kolchak the Night Stalker. And I believe Alan Hammack played
That's right.
Kolchak.
Alan, who was, what was his title? He was an editor, but
wasn't he?
I don't remember exactly what his title was. He wasn't, maybe he was I don't know. It's long enough. Head of development, something like that. But he was a designer, and actually the first module I worked on as editor and contributed to was his Ghost Tower of Inverness.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a wonderful
Good. I'm
adventure.
glad you liked it. I wrote the backstory.
A lot of people like that one.
Yeah,
really?
like some of it. I mean, Alan and I worked together, but it starts like Know You in the Elder Days. It's got like a Howard Shimarian thing, and I wrote that piece. Know You in the Elder Days. When the Aberrals were tall mountains and that kind of stuff. I wrote that stuff. So I worked with Alan on that, and it was just wonderful to hear that he'd been playing Kolchak and Chill.
Yeah, I think he had a pretty good time. He did a really good job of playing Kolchak, and all the players actually did really good jobs. We had, the editor of the newspaper being played, and we had all the characters from the show being played. And the players really had a great time. They really threw themselves into it. And we didn't have a lot of combat going, but I did get a chance to stop by your game after mine was done, because you were playing Chill kind of consecutively, like while I was running it, you were running it, but your game was going on still after mine was over. So I got a chance to kind of go over to your table, to watch and see what I was doing wrong.
There is no wrong or right.
Exactly. You had a great response, because I asked you, I said, I'm not sure I did combat right. And you said, well, did the players have a good time? And I said, I think they did. And you said, well, then you did it right.
Exactly. There's, I don't remember, and Lawrence doesn't remember either. It was either Lawrence Schick or Gary Gygax. And sadly, I can't ask Gary, who's at one point said to me, there are two rules. One is have fun. The other one is use dice. Basic role-playing rules.
Yeah.
So if you're doing those things, you're not doing it wrong. You're doing fine.
Well, there you go. Now, when you guys created Chill, how much talking did you guys do about combat? Was it going to be a game that was going to have a lot of combat? Was it going to be a game that was not going to have as much combat in it? Was it going to be more sleuthing? Were there ever talks about that, or was it just decided that, hey, however the person decided to run it, it's how that game is going to be?
The idea of Chill was to scare people, to make a creepy game experience, and not to be really hung up on the combat. Now, having said that, Mark Akers, who was one of the key designers, had designed Gangbusters over at TSR. And when I say designed, I mean he designed it. You may have been credited as rewriting it or something like that, but he did all the tough stuff in it. And he'd worked with Jeff Grubb, as I recall, in talking about the early Marvel game and stuff. So Mark had a really good grasp of game mechanics and came up with a combat system that seemed to discourage combat in some sense, and that it could be, if you weren't careful, it could be lethal very quickly. Because you don't want people just going in guns blazing to fight, the monsters. in this game. It's not like D&D where you kick open the door, there's the monster, and you kill it. It's a game where if you kick open the door and you shoot at the monster laughs because the monster is incorporeal, and now it's going to suck out your soul. So there was some de-emphasis on the combat system, but at the same time, I think the combat system works really well in Chill. It does require a little more math in your head because you have to subtract things than a lot of games do now. But it's one of those, once you start doing it, it becomes easy and obvious.
Yeah, and I got it. And it was nice to be able to go over to your table and watch you run the combat, because you had a little bit more combat in your game than I saw going on in my game, where your players were up against zombies.
Yeah, I've run a couple of different scenarios at GaryCon last couple of years, and one of them did involve a good number of zombies.
Nothing wrong with
some very
zombies.
Lovecraftian creatures, but there's, at the same time, there will be points where it comes time to fight or do something that might be fight worthy, because you don't want everything just to be a puzzle solving game, because that actually becomes pretty old too. If you can't have a car chase, and you can't have a fist fight, and you can't have shooting arrows at the vampire as it wings down towards you, trying to hit it with a blessed crossbow bolt or something. You need a little bit of that.
Yeah, it gets dry if you don't.
And in some sense, then if you're not rolling the dice, then it's not a game. Then it's improv.
Exactly.
Theater.
Well, what about the magic system? You guys had a magic system in that game. It was called the Way. Or
there were the dark arts, and the evil way was the bad. And what was the
evil way?
I don't remember what the one was off the top of my head for the magic system for the non-evil characters.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I remember the evil way. I know there's going to be a quiz. I would have looked it up this morning. Oh, I can never remember it either, but I remember. I mean, I always remember the system, and I always liked it. I thought that was really cool. I don't know why my mind just always blanks though.
It's the art. That's what it's called.
The art.
And
I wanted to call it. I wanted to call it the dark art. That's what So I was getting it. I was getting them mixed up. The dark way.
Yeah,
and
the evil way and the art.
The evil way and the art. Now, how did that come about? What was the thought process in putting that together?
The idea was that in these kind of classic horror stories, there's always somebody that has some kind of a psychic power, and so we wanted the players to potentially have the psychic powers and things that they could do to help them against these amazing and deadly creatures from the unknown. But at the same time, it's not a full-blown magic system in the way that you've got a guy that's a wizard that can just throw spells all day long. So like the combat, we tried to be a little more realistic with it, and you can only do it so much, or it's draining your energy in some way. So you can only do it to a certain point, and then you have to draw back. And you probably only do it when you really need to. So, so people aren't constantly sending each other ESP messages when they need to.
Right. They can't abuse it. In other words.
That was the idea, was to make a magic system that seemed plausible, as opposed to, dropping fireballs out of the sky, which, I love D&D. I started playing D&D in 77. Watched for 2 years before that. So I love D&D, but at the same time, the emphasis in the Chill game was on stuff that seemed more plausible.
Right. The people shouldn't believe you when you say you saw a ghost.
Yeah. One of the ideas was that you were, as a member of SAVE, you were protecting the normal world from things they wouldn't believe existed, much like Karl Kolchak. Right. I mean, he would always defeat the zombie or the swamp monster or the disco night or whatever it happened to be that week. And then no one would believe him.
Exactly. And he'd never have the evidence.
And Chill was kind of designed to be that, where you could have the people that were your friends would believe you, but society at large, they're going to write that off as it was a freak lightning storm. Marsh gas, swamp gas.
Well, you mentioned your history in gaming itself. I like to always ask the people that I interview, how did you first get into gaming? What was your break-in game and your gateway game, I guess you'd say? And how did you then make the transition to the other side of the table into the game industry?
Well, if you're talking about just games, I mean, most of us played board games as kids, and I certainly did. Clue was my favorite. and still occasionally will play Clue with other people, though we played with my daughter's girlfriend once, and she was like, "You guys play this really ruthlessly."
It's
Like,
the
"Oh,
only
yes,
way
we
to
do."
play it.
But not counting stuff like that, I got into gaming because of D&D. And I got into D&D because there was this really pretty girl who was sister of the game master who also played. So and people think I'm crazy when they say this. I started playing D&D to meet girls, and it worked wonderfully.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that's why they got into it, and I'm pretty sure I've never heard anyone say that it was.
Yeah, no,
good
it worked. It worked wonderfully. All of my best girlfriends were gamers.
Oh wow, you have led a charmed
Well, and
life,
my wife
sir.
has been gaming, almost as long as I have, and she was
wow.
third full-fledged gamer girl. One of the other ones was a sci-fi person too. So, despite what people think, there have always been women in this hobby, and I had been watching people play D&D in my high school almost since it came out. But I was a Tolkien purist at the time. I was like, "Oh no, you guys are just ruining Tolkien. I'm not going to do that game." But then there was this girl, and her brother was running D&D, and I thought, okay, I can do this. I can try this. And so I started playing in his game, and I started running my own game, and it was all just uphill from there. We got into Dragon Magazine. We were there when the Eldritch Wizardry and some of the other supplements came out. And then at some point, Dragon Magazine started having contests. They did a Draw the Monster contest, and I had an afternoon free. And I submitted an entry to the Draw the Monster contest, which was based on a Fritz Leiber quote, as I recall. And I came in third, which was awesome.
That is awesome.
I came in ahead of
What was
Errol Otis.
What was the monster
as a
you
matter
drew?
of fact.
Now that
The
is an
monster
accomplishment.
but behind Bob Charette. They were like lizard men creatures with fins on their heads and scythe-like swords where their hands should be. So I came in third in that contest. And then the next year, I think, they had a Design a Dungeon contest. And so I two-finger typed my way through a pretty good dungeon, and I came in second on that. And you can find both those things in Dragon Magazine. And then right after that happened, or during that process, they started advertising for looking for people to do design, development, and editing. And I applied. And I don't remember if I applied more than once, but I do remember that my dad's secretary, God love her, retyped my resume.
Oh, nice. That was nice.
So in 1980, I went out to Gen Con to stay at the house of the woman who's now my wife, and we were all gaming at Gen Con that year in 80, and I had my resume in, and Lawrence Schick had said, "We'd like to talk to you about do an interview with you." I was like, well, I'm going to be at Gen Con. So I came out and I met Lawrence at Gen Con, and he was hiring for Harold Johnson's department. And we spent the entire interview walking around looking for Harold because somehow there'd been a wire crossed and we never met. Finished the gaming, got back in the car, drove home with my wife who was going to visit a friend, 24 hours without sleep. Got to my house, literally laid down, and an hour later, the phone rang. And it was Lawrence. And I said, "Oh, hey, Lawrence, how you doing?" And me having no sleep. We just got home. And Lawrence said, "Well, how soon can you be back here?" And we're like, oh man. How soon do you want me? Right.
Who needs sleep?
Who needs sleep?
That is
a week or 10
awesome.
days later, I was in Lake Geneva working for TSR.
That is like the fairy tale story. I think every gamer wishes that
It was, and that same week I got a job and I got a wife. What more can you ask?
That was a
that
good
was a
Gary.
great Gen
That was
Con.
a good Gen
It was
Con.
really amazing.
That was a really good Gen Con. Well, Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on our show and tell us a little bit about the history of Chill and Pacesetter and the work you did over at TSR and yourself. I know you're very busy, so that's even more reason why I appreciate your willingness to come on our post-Halloween show, which I just thought you were the perfect guest.
I've had a great time doing this, and I want to encourage everyone if you can find the first edition of Chill in PDF or whatever, play the game. It's still a great game all these years later.
It is. And if you get a chance to go to GaryCon, or are you going to be at Game
not
Hole?
sure. Not sure. GaryCon
Okay.
for sure.
All right. Well, you heard it here. If you get a chance to go to GaryCon, you're going to have to move fast because his games sell out quick. But if you can get a seat at Steve's table, you're going to have a great time playing Chill. So with that said, I would just like to say one more time, thank you very much, Steve. And I hope you have a great coming year ahead of you. And I hope that, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at GaryCon.
Thanks, Chad. It's been a lot of fun. I'd love to do this again. It seems like we barely started and suddenly I have to run.
Yeah, I understand. All right, so you have a great day. And to all the listeners, keep playing with dead things.